Stand on the north bank of the Thames at low tide today, and you can still see Roman piles driven into the riverbed 2,000 years ago. More than 9 million people call this city home, speaking 300 languages across 33 boroughs. The most linguistically diverse metropolis on Earth. But rewind 2 millennia, and you would have found a muddy crossing where Celtic tribes forded a tidal river, surrounded by marshland and forest, with no stone buildings for 100 miles. Conquest, fire, plague, rebirth. Using cutting-edge AI reconstruction, we are about to walk you through every century of London's story, from the Roman invasion of 43 AD to the skyscrapers you can visit today. This is the tale of a city that began as a military checkpoint, became the nerve center of the largest empire in human history, burned to ash and rebuilt itself, survived the Blitz and emerged as one of the world's 3 true global cities. A city conquered by Romans, Saxons, Vikings, and Normans. A city that executed kings and welcomed refugees. A city of fog and finance, plague pits and palaces. This is the entire history of London. In the summer of 43 AD, 4 Roman legions, 40,000 men, landed on the Kentish coast under Emperor Claudius. The local Catovelluni tribe fought them at the Medway River and lost. Within months, Roman engineers had identified the first viable crossing point on the Thames, just downstream from where London Bridge stands now. They built a timber bridge and a supply depot on the north bank. The locals called the area Ploanida. The Romans called it Londinium. By 50 AD, it was a proper town, timber warehouses, a military fort, streets laid in a grid. The Thames made it invaluable. Tin from Cornwall, grain from Kent, silver from Wales, all flowed through Londinium's docks and up the Watling Street to the garrison towns of the north. In 60 AD, the Iceni queen Boudica led a revolt that turned the town to ash. Tacitus wrote that the rebels slaughtered 70,000 Romans and Britons in 3 cities. Archaeologists have found a layer of burnt red clay beneath the modern square mile, Boudica's signature. But Rome rebuilt. By 100 AD, Londinium had stone walls, a forum larger than Trafalgar Square, a basilica, an amphitheatre seating 7,000, public baths fed by aqueducts, and a population approaching 30,000. It was the capital of Britannia. Merchants from Gaul and Syria walked the streets. Red Samian pottery from France, olive oil from Spain, silk rumoured to come from the edge of the known world. In 122 AD, Emperor Hadrian visited and likely ordered the construction of his northern wall. Londinium thrived for 2 more centuries. Mosaics, hypocausts, a governor's palace overlooking the river. But by 300 AD, Saxon pirates raided the coast. By 350 AD, the legions were being recalled to defend Rome itself. In 410 AD, Emperor Honorius sent a letter to the cities of Britain. Defend yourselves. The garrison marched out. The stone forum fell silent. For 2 centuries, grass grew through the pavements. The Saxon migrations began in the 5th century. Germanic tribes, Angles, Saxons, Jutes, crossed the North Sea and settled the Thames Valley. They avoided the Roman ruins. Stone cities were places of ghosts. Instead, around 600 AD, they built a new settlement upstream on the Strand, where Covent Garden is now. They called it Lundenwic. Excavations revealed timber halls, bone combs, pottery kilns. By 650 AD, it was a thriving port again. Arab coins had been found in Saxon Lundenwic, proof that trade reached as far as Baghdad. In 604 AD, King Ethelbert of Kent allowed a missionary named Mellitus to build a church on the abandoned Roman site. That church became St. Paul's. Christianity was returning, slowly, alongside the pagan gods. In 842 AD, Viking longships sailed up the Thames and sacked Lundenwic. They returned in 851, this time with 350 ships. The Saxons fled inland. For decades, the river was a highway for Danish raiders. Then Alfred the Great arrived. In 886 AD, Alfred recaptured Lundenwic from the Danes and did something radical. He moved the settlement back inside the old Roman walls. He dredged the ditch, rebuilt the gates. The city became Lundenburh, London fortified. His son-in-law, Ethelred of Mercia, governed it. Alfred divided the walled area into wards, each responsible for defence. That system still governs the City of London today. The street plan Alfred laid down, Cheapside, Poultry, Cornhill, is the street plan you walk now. London became a burh in a network of burhs, a fortress city designed to hold the line against the Danes. It worked. By 950 AD, London had a mint. By 1000 AD, it had 12,000 people. Markets at Billingsgate, docks at Queenhithe, a bridge rebuilt in timber. But the Danes were not finished. In 1013, Sweyn Forkbeard besieged London. In 1016, his son Cnut conquered England and made London his capital. For 25 years, England was part of a North Sea empire stretching from Norway to Denmark. When Cnut died in 1035, the succession fractured. Edward the Confessor took the throne in 1042 and built an abbey upstream at Westminster, creating a second pole of power. When Edward died childless in January 1066, 3 men claimed England. Harold Godwinson was crowned in Westminster. Harold Hardrada of Norway invaded from the north. William of Normandy prepared an armada in the south. At Stamford Bridge, Harold defeated the Vikings. At Hastings, William defeated Harold. On Christmas Day 1066, William the Conqueror was crowned king in Westminster Abbey. London had not resisted him. The city fathers opened the gates. William confirmed their ancient laws and built a fortress on the riverbank to remind them who held the sword. That fortress is the Tower of London. The Normans transformed London from a Saxon market town into the stone and mortar capital of a feudal kingdom. William I built 3 castles: the Tower, Baynard's Castle, Montfichet's Tower. His son William II built Westminster Hall in 1097, its hammer-beam roof the largest in Europe. The White Tower, completed in 1100, loomed 11 stories above the Thames, a message in Caen limestone. By 1100, London had 18,000 people. By 1200, 40,000. Guilds controlled the trades: the mercers, the goldsmiths, the fishmongers. The city governed itself through aldermen elected by the wards. In 1189, Richard the Lionheart granted London the right to elect its own mayor. The first mayor, Henry Fitzaylwin, served for 24 years. London was now a self-governing commune inside a kingdom, paying taxes directly to the crown and defending its liberties with charters written in Latin. London Bridge was rebuilt in stone between 1176 and 1209, funded by a tax on wool. It had 19 arches, a chapel in the middle, houses and shops stacked 5 stories tall on either side. For 600 years, it was the only bridge across the Thames in London. Heads of traitors were displayed on pikes at the southern gatehouse. In 1215, London's aldermen and merchants backed the barons who forced King John to sign Magna Carta at Runnymede. The city's support was decisive. Clause 13 of Magna Carta confirmed London's ancient liberties. By 1300, London had 80,000 people, making it one of the largest cities in Europe. Docks stretched from the Tower to Westminster. Warehouses stored wine from Gascony, spices from Venice, furs from the Baltic. The Hanseatic League built the steel yard on the riverbank. Lombard Street became the centre of Italian banking. But medieval London was filth and splendour pressed into 1 square mile. Open sewers ran down the centre of every street. Butchers dumped offal into the Fleet River. Pigs roamed freely. The city enacted laws requiring citizens to keep their stretch of street clean. But enforcement was irregular. Disease was constant. In 1348, the Black Death arrived aboard a ship from Calais. By 1350, half of London's population was dead. Plague pits were dug at Smithfield, East Smithfield, and Spitalfields. The city's economy collapsed. Wages spiked as labourers became scarce. In 1381, peasants marched on London during the Peasants' Revolt, led by Wat Tyler and John Ball. They burned John of Gaunt's palace at the Savoy, stormed the Tower, and executed the Archbishop of Canterbury. The teenage king, Richard II, met the rebels at Smithfield and promised reforms. Then he broke his promises and hanged the leaders. London rebuilt. By 1400, Westminster was the seat of royal power: courts, bureaucracy, parliament. The City of London was the seat of commerce: guilds, markets, money. This dual structure persists today. The 15th century saw the Wars of the Roses bleed into the city streets. In 1461, Edward IV marched into London and deposed Henry VI. In 1471, Henry VI was murdered in the Tower. In 1483, Edward IV's sons, the princes in the Tower, disappeared, likely murdered by their uncle, Richard III. London's merchants thrived regardless. The merchant adventurers exported wool to Antwerp. Goldsmiths on Cheapside became proto-bankers, holding deposits and issuing notes. Printing arrived in 1476 when William Caxton set up a press in Westminster. By 1500, London had 50,000 people, and its skyline was a forest of church spires, over 100 parishes within the walls. The 16th century began with a wedding and ended with an empire. In 1501, Catherine of Aragon arrived in London to marry Prince Arthur. He died 5 months later. She married his younger brother, Henry. When Henry VIII became king in 1509, London was still a medieval city of wood and thatch. When Elizabeth I died in 1603, it was the capital of a Protestant nation and an emerging maritime power. Henry VIII spent his early reign at tournaments and masques. His chief minister, Thomas Wolsey, built Hampton Court Palace and wielded papal authority as cardinal legate. But in 1527, Henry demanded an annulment from Catherine to marry Anne Boleyn. The Pope refused. Henry broke with Rome, declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, and triggered the English Reformation. Between 1536 and 1541, Henry dissolved the monasteries. Greyfriars, Blackfriars, the Charterhouse, the Abbey of St. Mary Graces. Stripped, sold, demolished. Monastic land became aristocratic estates. The dissolution reshaped London's geography. In 1536, Anne Boleyn was executed at the Tower on charges of adultery and treason. In 1540, Thomas Cromwell, the architect of the Reformation, followed her to the block. Henry married 6 times. 3 of his wives are buried in the Tower Chapel. When Henry died in 1547, his 9-year-old son became Edward VI. Protestant reformers seized control. Latin Mass was banned, stained glass smashed, rood screens torn down. Edward died at 15 in 1553. His Catholic half-sister Mary took the throne and reversed everything. For 5 years, England returned to Rome. Protestants were burned at Smithfield, nearly 300 martyrs, including Bishops Latimer, Ridley, and Cranmer. Mary died childless in 1558. Her Protestant half-sister Elizabeth became queen at 25 and would reign for 45 years. Elizabeth restored the Protestant settlement, but with moderation. She executed Catholics and Puritans alike when they threatened stability. Her chief spymaster, Francis Walsingham, ran a network of informants across Europe. In 1586, he uncovered the Babington plot to assassinate Elizabeth and put Mary, Queen of Scots, on the throne. Mary was beheaded at Fotheringhay. London exploded in size during Elizabeth's reign. By 1600, the city had 200,000 people. Overcrowding forced expansion beyond the walls. Shoreditch, Clerkenwell, Southwark. Suburbs bloomed. The Crown tried repeatedly to ban new construction. The city ignored the edicts. In 1599, the Globe Theatre opened on Bankside. William Shakespeare's company performed there. Hamlet, Othello, King Lear. Bear-baiting arenas, brothels, and plague-ridden tenements surrounded it. Southwark was outside the city's jurisdiction, a zone of vice and entertainment. The Thames froze solid in the winter of 1564 and again in 1595. Londoners held frost fairs on the ice, archery, football, roasting oxen. The river was the city's main highway. 20,000 watermen ferried passengers in wherries. London Bridge was so clogged with houses that crossing it on foot took 20 minutes. Plague returned every decade. In 1563, a fifth of London died. In 1593, the theatres closed for a year. Physicians fled. The poor were locked in their houses with red crosses painted on the doors. But trade continued. The Muscovy Company, the Levant Company, the East India Company, each received a royal charter and began trading expeditions to Russia, the Ottoman Empire, and the East Indies. London's merchants were venturing to the edges of the known world. In 1588, the Spanish Armada sailed up the Channel. Beacons blazed from hilltops. London's militia mustered at Tilbury. Elizabeth rode among them in armour and declared she had the heart of a king. The Armada scattered in a storm. England had survived, and London, crowded and pestilent and bursting at the seams, was becoming the hinge of a global empire. James I became king in 1603, uniting the English and Scottish crowns. London now had 300,000 people jammed into a city built for 50,000. In 1605, a group of Catholic conspirators rented a cellar beneath Parliament and filled it with gunpowder. Guy Fawkes was discovered guarding the barrels on November 5th. He was tortured in the Tower and executed at Westminster. Londoners lit bonfires in celebration, a tradition that continues 4 centuries later. James commissioned a new translation of the Bible, published in 1611 and still read today. But he clashed constantly with Parliament over money and religion. His son Charles III inherited those conflicts and escalated them. Charles believed in the divine right of kings. Parliament believed in the ancient liberties of England. In 1629, Charles dismissed Parliament and ruled without it for 11 years. He imposed taxes without consent. In 1642, he tried to arrest 5 members of Parliament inside the House of Commons. London's trained bands blocked his way. The king fled. Civil war erupted. London backed Parliament. The city raised regiments, built fortifications, and lent money to the war effort. For 4 years, royalists and parliamentarians tore England apart. In 1645, Oliver Cromwell's new model army destroyed the king's forces at Naseby. Charles surrendered, escaped, was recaptured. In January 1649, he was tried for treason in Westminster Hall. He refused to plead. He was convicted and beheaded outside Banqueting House in Whitehall. England became a republic. The Commonwealth. Cromwell crushed royalist risings in Ireland and Scotland, then ruled as Lord Protector until his death in 1658. His son Richard lasted 8 months. In 1660, General George Monk marched into London and invited Charles II to return from exile. The Restoration began. Cromwell's corpse was exhumed, hanged, and beheaded. His skull was displayed on a pike outside Westminster Hall for 24 years. Charles II reopened the theatres and brought back Christmas. But catastrophe was coming. In 1665, bubonic plague returned with medieval ferocity. By September, 7,000 Londoners were dying every week. Entire streets were abandoned. Grass grew in Cheapside. The wealthy fled to the countryside. Samuel Pepys recorded the horror in his diary. Bodies stacked in carts, plague pits overflowing, red crosses on every door. By the time the plague burned out in early 1666, 100,000 Londoners, a quarter of the population, were dead. Then, on September 2nd, 1666, a fire started in a bakery on Pudding Lane. The summer had been dry. The city was timber. The wind was strong. The Great Fire burned for 4 days and consumed 13,000 houses, 87 churches, and St. Paul's Cathedral. John Evelyn watched molten lead streaming from the cathedral roof. Only 6 people were recorded dead, but thousands were left homeless. Charles II appointed Christopher Wren to rebuild. Over the next 40 years, Wren designed 51 new churches, including a new St. Paul's with the largest dome in Britain. His monument stands at Pudding Lane, a 200-foot column topped with a golden urn of flames. Building codes were imposed for the first time: brick and stone, minimum street widths, fire breaks. London would never burn like that again. In 1688, Protestant nobles invited the Dutch Prince William of Orange to invade and depose the Catholic King James II. William landed with an army. James fled to France. The Glorious Revolution was bloodless. Parliament now reigned supreme. In 1694, the Bank of England was founded to manage the national debt. In 1707, the Act of Union merged England and Scotland into Great Britain. London was the capital of a united kingdom and the centre of a financial revolution that would fund the empire to come. In 1714, the population was 600,000. By 1801, it was 1 million, the first city in the modern world to reach that threshold. By 1900, 6.5 million. The Georgian and Victorian eras transformed London from a walled medieval city into the largest metropolis on earth. Georgian London was elegant squares and speculative terraces. Grosvenor Square, Bloomsbury, Mayfair. Aristocrats built townhouses. Developers laid out crescents and circuses. Coffee houses on every corner became centres of debate. Lloyd's Coffee House became Lloyd's of London. The stock exchange formalised in 1801. Banking, insurance, shipping, the city became the financial engine of an empire. The Regency brought John Nash's grand designs, Regent Street, Regent's Park, Trafalgar Square. But beyond the West End lay rookeries, slums where 10 families crammed into a single room. Gin was cheaper than beer. Cholera epidemics killed thousands. In 1829, Robert Peel founded the Metropolitan Police, the first modern urban police force. Officers in blue tailcoats walked fixed beats. Crime fell. Public executions at Tyburn ended. Hangings moved behind the walls of Newgate Prison. The Victorian age was iron and steam. The Thames Tunnel opened in 1843, the first tunnel under a navigable river. The Great Exhibition of 1851 drew 6 million visitors to the Crystal Palace in Hyde Park. The Underground opened in 1863, the world's first underground railway, using steam locomotives in brick tunnels. Paddington to Farringdon in 18 minutes. Charles Dickens chronicled the poverty and grandeur in Oliver Twist, Bleak House, and Great Expectations. The Thames was an open sewer until Joseph Bazalgette built 82 miles of intercepting sewers in the 1860s. His embankments reclaimed land, buried sewers, and carried a new underground railway. Cholera disappeared. Tower Bridge opened in 1894, its bascules lifting for tall ships. By 1900, London was the capital of an empire covering a quarter of the Earth's land surface. The docks stretched for miles downriver. West India Docks, Millwall, Tilbury, handling goods from Bombay, Sydney, Hong Kong, Cape Town. The city financed railways in Argentina, mines in South Africa, plantations in Malaya. 2/3 of the world's trade was financed through London. Piccadilly Circus blazed with electric lights. Department stores like Harrods and Selfridges offered consumption on a scale never seen. Music halls entertained the working class. The British Museum and National Gallery displayed the spoils of empire. Covent Garden Opera House staged Wagner. In 1908, London hosted the Olympic Games at White City Stadium. But inequality was vast. The East End was a world apart. Dockworkers, matchgirls, Jewish refugees fleeing Russian pogroms. In 1888, Jack the Ripper murdered 5 women in Whitechapel. The case was never solved. In 1889, dockworkers struck for the dockers' tanner, 6pence an hour, and won. The age of mass politics had begun. Suffragettes chained themselves to railings, smashed windows, hunger-struck in Holloway Prison. Emmeline Pankhurst was arrested repeatedly. The vote would not come until after the Great War. In August 1914, crowds gathered in Whitehall cheering the declaration of war. 4 years later, 1 million men from Britain and the Empire were dead. Zeppelins bombed London in 1915, the first aerial attacks on a civilian city. Liverpool Street Station was hit. Lights were extinguished at night. The city learned what it meant to be a target. Between the wars, London sprawled into suburbia. The Underground extended into Middlesex and Surrey. Semi-detached houses with gardens, Metroland. The BBC began broadcasting from Savoy Hill in 1922. The first red double-decker buses appeared. Art Deco cinemas rose on every high street. In 1936, 200,000 Londoners lined the streets for the funeral of George V. Edward VIII abdicated to marry Wallis Simpson. George VI became king. In September 1939, Britain declared war on Germany. Children were evacuated to the countryside. Anderson shelters appeared in back gardens. Then, on September 7, 1940, the Blitz began. For 57 consecutive nights, German bombers struck London. The East End docks burned. St. Paul's was hit by 28 incendiary bombs and survived, a symbol of defiance. Balham Tube Station flooded, drowning 68 people sheltering inside. Bomb craters pocked every borough. 43,000 civilians died across Britain, 20,000 in London. St. Paul's stood wreathed in smoke on December 29, 1940, photographed by Herbert Mason in the most iconic image of the war. Winston Churchill broadcast from underground cabinet war rooms beneath Whitehall. The city endured. In 1944, V-1 flying bombs and V-2 rockets struck without warning. A V-2 hit Woolworths in New Cross, killing 168 shoppers. Victory came in May 1945. Street parties filled every neighborhood, but the city was exhausted, bombed out, broke. Rationing continued until 1954. The docks never fully recovered. Shipping moved to containerized ports downstream. The post-war years were grey and austere, prefab housing. Super fogs. In December 1952, the Great Smog killed 4,000 people in 4 days. Clean Air Acts followed. Coal fires were banned. The fog lifted. In 1951, the Festival of Britain on the South Bank tried to imagine a modern future. The Royal Festival Hall opened. The skylon pointed skyward. Immigrants from the Caribbean arrived aboard the Empire Windrush in 1948, the Windrush generation, invited to rebuild Britain. Communities formed in Brixton, Notting Hill, Tottenham. Notting Hill Carnival began in 1966 and became Europe's largest street festival. The 1960s brought cultural explosion. The Beatles played the Palladium. The Rolling Stones played Hyde Park. Carnaby Street and the King's Road defined swinging London. Brutalist towers rose. Trellick Tower, the Barbican. The Post Office Tower opened in 1965, the tallest building in London until 1980. In 1981, riots erupted in Brixton after heavy-handed policing. In 1986, the Big Bang deregulated financial markets. Glass towers replaced Victorian warehouses. Canary Wharf rose in the former Docklands. One Canada Square, the first skyscraper to break the informal height limit respecting St. Paul's. The IRA bombed the Baltic Exchange in 1992, Bishopsgate in 1993. The city rebuilt with better security. The Millennium brought the London Eye, the Millennium Dome, the Tate Modern in a converted power station. In 2005, London won the bid for the 2012 Olympics. The next day, July the 7th, suicide bombers killed 52 people on 3 tube trains and a bus. Londoners returned to work the next morning. The 2012 Olympics were a triumph. The Shard opened in 2012, the tallest building in Western Europe. Crossrail, the Elizabeth Line, opened in 2022 after decades of construction. In 2020, the pandemic emptied the city for the first time since the Blitz. Streets silent, theatres dark. Then the vaccine arrived and the crowds returned. Today, stand on the Millennium Bridge with St. Paul's framed before you and the Shard rising behind, and you see 2,000 years in one sightline. Roman foundations beneath your feet, medieval street plan around you. Victorian engineering holding up the underground. A city rebuilt after fire, a city that refused to fall during the Blitz. A city that has been conquered, burned, plagued and bombed, and has survived every time. London.